It's a Guy Jeans podcast.
Hey you guys, welcome to the podcast. This is your host Guy Jeans, and I got a really special podcast today. I've got a guest named Dan Christensen. He's a retired fish and wildlife biologist. Back in the day, he was literally one of the guys who saved the Little Kern golden trout from extinction. Pretty cool. But he's going to be talking about the three heritage trout that we have in the Southern Sierra: the golden trout, the Kern River rainbow, and the Little Kern golden trout. And it's, for those that don't know, California is home to 10 native trout, which is more than any other state, which is pretty cool. And I've talked about it in other podcasts. One of the things that's really neat that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife does is they have this program called the California Heritage Trout Program. And if you catch 6 of the 10 native trout in California in their native drainages, the Fish and Wildlife will give you Joseph Tomarelli's paintings, which are prints of those paintings on a cool poster, and it'll say your name, such and such has caught 6 of the 10 native trout of California. And it's a really cool program that they have going on, and it's really popular in our area, in the Southern Sierra, in the Kern River area, because you can get the 3 done in a couple days. Most people do it in 3 days. If some people can do it in 2. If you're a total fly fishing stud or fisherman stud, you could probably do it in a day, but you're not going to be really able to enjoy those fisheries that are where these fish are at. And so a lot of people like to take 2 or 3 days to do the Heritage Trout program in the Southern Sierra. And so he's going to be talking about, Dan Christensen is going to be talking about some cool stuff. He's going to be talking about all the fish species that we have in the drainage, in the Kern River drainage, but the native fish as well. But he's going to talk about a little bit about the history of the golden trout wilderness, which is really cool. But this guy is basically the authority on the Kern River rainbow, the golden trout, and the Little Kern golden trout. And I hope you guys enjoy this. This is a older interview that we did years ago, and I hope you guys enjoy this. This guy is an amazing person and what he has done for the fishery of the Kern River. So I hope you enjoy. Here is Dan Christensen.
Hi, I'm Dan Christensen, and I'm a retired fish and game biologist from the California Fish and Game. After 40 years of work there, probably best known for my work with the Little Kern golden trout. It began in 1965 to explore the Little Kern River drainage, looking for possibly pure populations of the golden trout there. And that was followed by about 30 years of exploring, taking genetic samples, eliminating non-native species, and restoring the pure populations to there's possibly 100 miles of stream in that drainage. The golden trout wilderness was established in 1978 after a good deal of negotiations and meetings and so on. Artis Walker was probably the instigator of this project, and he was a local Kernville resident. And I became interested through my golden trout work. And also another fish and game biologist from Bishop, Phil Peaster, was instrumental in the eastern part of it, where he worked. And it's about over 300,000 acres, stretching from the Mojave Desert, almost Highway 395, westward over the Sierra Crest, across the Kern Plateau, down through the Kern River Canyon, which we'll be talking about, and then up the Great Western Divide, and even a little bit over into the Tule River drainage on the western slopes of the Great Western Divide. It's a quite varied topography, a lot of high elevation places, 8,000-9,000 feet easily, and the home of the 3 subspecies of rainbow trout that I consider as goldens. The California golden trout on the east, the Kern River rainbow trout and the main stem of the Kern River, and the Little Kern golden trout and the Little Kern River drainage. There's several native species of fish in the Kern River, the upper Kern. Of course, the Kern River rainbow trout is the most sought after and popular, but there's also western suckers that occur all up and down the San Joaquin, Sacramento Valley, and they are very adaptable to different kinds of habitat, and they extend all the way up into the Sequoia National Park. Couple other that's the sucker species. There's a couple other minnow species. One is the hardhead, which is probably found in the lower part, very lowest parts of the golden trout wilderness on the Kern River. And then there's the squawfish, which gets very large. It's a predatory minnow, if you can feature that. And they extend farther up the Kern River, but probably not as far as the Sequoia National Park. These fish all entered this part of the Kern River probably eons ago. They're probably in post-glacial periods when there's high water flows and cold water temperatures, and the Kern River might flow all the way to the ocean. Steelhead possibly entered and were found their way up the Kern River. In many thousands of years ago, these rainbow trout that entered the river would divide off into either the South Fork of the Kern or the Little Kern River and become isolated for 10 to 20,000 years. And as a result of that isolation, they become more and more genetically differentiated from each other, the three subspecies up there, and also different from their rainbow trout progenitors. So they all entered, even the non-game fish, the suckers and the squawfish, would have entered the Kern River following glaciers, because there was no way for fish to survive during those periods in the upper part of the river. So they all came from the ocean or in the valley and moved up the river over thousands of years, became isolated, and through interbreeding differentiated one from another to get what we have today. Okay, a wilderness area is an area that's designated by Congress to be protected from unnatural impacts. And it's an area that's supposed to be untrammeled by humans, that if people go there, it's to go there to experience the place and then to leave, not to stay there permanently. And thus, to take care of an area like that requires a little bit of respect for the environment back there, not to do damage, not to litter, throw trash around. But it's an area that you go to experience the values there and to leave impressed by it, but not leave any traces of your having been there. The Kern River is one of the major streams draining the Sierra Nevada, and it's unique in a way that it drains from north to south rather than from east to west like most of the others, the Kings River, the San Joaquin, Merced, and so on, which drain westwardly out of the Sierra. Well, the Kern River drains southerly, and it's primarily because of an earthquake fault that runs up and down the Sierra block here. And the glaciers and erosion over millions of years has carved the canyon in that direction, cutting it deeper and deeper. And up in when you get up into the wilderness and beyond, you will see a canyon that has been carved by glaciers. It's a U-shaped canyon. Instead of a V like most erosion takes place, it's a U-shaped thing indicating it was carved by glaciers. And so for over millions of years that glaciers worked had their way with the canyon and formed that a spectacular view up there as you visit the area. Back a little bit farther to think about the Sierra Nevada, it was a molten rock formation, probably 200 miles north to south, that cooled underground, and then forces moved it up, lifted it up above the surrounding terrain. The surface soils and so on, rock, were eroded away, leaving this solid block of granite for 200 miles. And as it lifted, it tilted higher on the east and lower on the west. And that's what we see today. If you go to the eastern side of the Sierra Nevada, it rises up from the desert practically vertically. And then on the west side, you see a gentle slope all the way down to the San Joaquin Valley over possibly 50 or 60 miles. And so this is how this mountain range formed, and then subsequent earthquake faults and glaciation and erosion and so on left it the way we see it today. The Kern River drainage covers quite a lot of territory and actually begins up in Sequoia National Park. The highest elevations in the drainage, and to the north you have the Kings River drainage, on the west you have the Cahuilla drainage, and on the east is the Owens Valley. And of course Mount Whitney on the crest of the Sierra is one of the headwaters of the Kern River. And there are many glaciated lakes surrounding the upper basin that were originally barren of fish. People eventually took fish and planted them in those lakes. Some of them are self-sustaining through the years. And from that higher elevation around the fringe of the upper basin drops steeply into the Kern River Canyon, the glaciated canyon, leaving waterfalls all the way around there, beautiful waterfalls. And those over the years had prevented fish from occupying those upper lakes. So that whole upper basin there was barren of fish until people moved them in there. But the Kern River itself, from Junction Meadow in the National Park all the way down through into the Central Valley, was accessible to fish from below. And the Kern River is fortunate in two ways. The first is that the water is very clear, very clean, and very suitable for trout. And the other is that the river substrate is mostly rocks and boulders, very resistant to damage from any sort of source. The biggest problem that the river has is that erosion from surfaces upstream bring in sediments, and you'll see sand deposits up and down the stream, and sometimes those can be excessive. They can smother out spawning areas. They can smother out areas of food production for trout and so on. So that's probably the biggest issue with the Kern River itself. Sedimentation is natural to a degree, but every time that there's an outside impact, cattle for example, although there's no roads in that upper drainage, but cattle damage to soils and stuff can accelerate erosion and sedimentation in the stream. Fires too, as we could see in the recent McNally fire, expose a lot of soil to rainfall, and this can create a lot of sediment entering the stream. And fires occur naturally, but usually it'll be in a small area. It'll be a short term. In 2 or 3 or 4 years, the water will clear up, the erosion will stop, and the river will start to recover from it. The flow of the river is determined primarily by snowfall. In the winters in the upper basin can accumulate a lot of snow, and it takes a long time at those high elevations, a long time to melt all that snow. and therefore we have a river that runs quite nicely all through the summer and into the fall. Rainfall can enter the picture a little bit, but mostly it comes in summer thunderstorms, and that also can bring in sediments and so on from the tributaries. But the biggest thing is the snowpack and its effect on the river flow over a long period of time, all through the summer. In the future, for the upper Kern River, the biggest help that can be done is to control the amount of erosion that's taking place in the drainage. The river itself is, like I said, it's rock bottom and very durable, but the amount of erosion in the watershed up above can introduce a lot more sediment than is needed or is helpful. And so to maintain the health of the river, that would be probably the biggest impact. Wherever there's grazing, you can get erosion impacts like that. And otherwise, there's probably a million little points of like trail crossings of streams that are allowed rainwater to wash sand or sediments into the tributary stream, not necessarily the Kern River itself. But throughout the drainage, there's probably little point sources of erosion that could be repaired, fixed, and other places where it can be prevented. Changing trail locations and things like that might help. The trout of the upper Kern River basin include the three what I call golden trout, and each of them developed or evolved over thousands of years into genetically different animals. The Kern River rainbow trout, of course, exists in places downstream from Golden Trout Creek, for example, which has California golden trout in it. The Little Kern also enters into the river. Therefore, some of those fish could migrate down into the Kern River. The California golden trout or the Little Kern golden trout. Now that being the case, then the Kern River rainbow trout has been kind of a combination of the three different types. They're kind of an intermediate between the others. And because they receive occasional downstream migrants from the other populations that can mix in genetically, then the Kern River rainbow trout is a kind of an intermediate form to the other two. They are distinctive. All three of them are distinctive in each population. And it's an interesting thing that you can take a Kern River rainbow trout, which has very little color, lots of spots. You can transplant them up into a high elevation meadow habitat, for example, and over a few generations, reproduction, those Kern River rainbow trout will start to look like goldens. They start to become a little more colored up and so on. They retain the spots, but they can adapt to that different kind of habitat, different kind of food, and actually start to look different. So that's an interesting concept, and you tend to look at, okay, a Kern River rainbow looks like this, and a golden looks like that, and so on. But you got to be careful because they can change their colors, so to speak. It was back in 1904 that B.W. Everman, fishery scientist from Washington, D.C., took a trip from Visalia over through the Little Kern River drainage to the Kern River, over to the Kern Plateau, and over to the Owens Valley. And during that trip, he discovered these three types of fish and described them in very minute detail. He had along with him an artist who took some of the type specimens, the first fish that they caught of each of these species, and made a painting, a precise painting of how they looked. And but even before that, people had migrated through there, cattle people and so on, and had seen these fish, and some people had described them and written about them and so on, but it was Everman who made the definitive scientific description of the three types. It was interesting that at Kern Lakes on his trip, he was able to see these Kern River rainbow trout, and they were, huge, 20 to 24 inch long fish. At that time, he felt that Kern Lake was a breeding area for the Kern River rainbow trout, and thought it should be protected. Now, Kern Lake, I think, was formed in the 1860s or so by a landslide off the side of the Kern River Canyon. Slid down and plugged up the Kern River and backed up and made a lake. And of course, the lake produced big trout. There was actually a regulation that said no fishing in Kern Lake because it was a breeding area. Well, when I went there the first time in probably around 1970 or so, Kern Lake had not only filled in with sand from upstream, but the rock fill that had fallen into the canyon was starting to erode away. And so this Kern Lake was shrinking down and shrinking down. I think from something like 60 acres early on to about 4 or 5 acres when I saw it. And it continues to fill in and so on. And its value as a nursery area or something has pretty much gone the way of all things. I believe that the regulation on no fishing there has been removed because of the change in its character. What has happened with the Kern River rainbow, which used to occur naturally all the way down the Kern River and even to below the present community of Isabella Lake, or Lake Isabella. Artist Walker, who was born there about 100 years ago, talked of going down to the river right there and catching large Kern River rainbow trout. Bob Powers also talked of catching them occasionally in the South Fork out by Weldon and to the east of present-day Lake Isabella. When roads and power plants were put on the river up here and more people came in, overfishing. I mean, you hear stories about people that catch wash tubs full of trout that are 20 inches long or so. No problem catching all you wanted. Well, you fish like that for very many years, and of course the population takes a dive. In the 30s is when the Kern River hatchery had its beginnings, and it was because people saw, they can't catch these big fish anymore. They tried to propagate trout and stock them in the river. And that program, more and more people fish, so more and more people require planting of fish in the river. And so that's kind of where we are today. And as a result, I mean, most of these fish that were planted were non-natives. So the Kern River rainbow trout is virtually extinct in the lower part of the river here. You probably won't find anywhere near the pure genetic strain until you get up to forks of the Kern or on up into the Sequoia Park through this golden trout wilderness area. The status of these fish, if we're going to try to protect them, means that we need to do genetic work on all the populations upstream and find out if there are places where there are pure strains left or places where there are non-natives which need to be eliminated, and then restock some pure strain ones. I understand there's an effort with the Kern River hatchery to bring in some pure Kern River rainbow trout and start propagating them. We tried that 20 years ago and it failed, and we started again a few years back, and it's at the point now where we have to start all over practically to get genetically pure fish, bring them into the hatchery, and start raising young ones for stocking. And that's to try to eliminate non-native fish out of the Kern River is going to be almost impossible. So what you have to do is swamp out any non-native populations by massive planting of pure strain Kern River rainbow trout. So overfishing was the original problem with that, and the current regulation calls for 2 fish limit, barbless lures, barbless hooks, lures only, and you can't keep a fish over 10 inches long. And the idea behind that is that, okay, you can take a little fish, but leave the big ones there to spawn and try to build up a population of larger fish rather than smaller fish. And it seems to be working. Time will tell on that. The other big problem with the Kern River rainbow trout is hybridization with non-native rainbow trout that might have been planted up above. So those have to be controlled. Yeah, the food habits of the Kern River rainbow trout are quite varied. They are what we call an omnivore. They will eat just damn near anything that moves. They prefer live organisms, aquatic insects that are produced by the stream itself, or terrestrial insects that might fall on the water or get near it, they'll grab it. They are cannibalistic. They will eat their own young or anyone else's young. As fish get bigger, they require larger food items, and so smaller fish and other things are fair game for them. They differ considerably from the other native species. The sucker, which feeds primarily on plant material and detritus and so on the stream bottom. You can see them scavenging around on the rocks. And up in that area, the squawfish is another predator. It'll eat fish of almost any size, so it competes with the rainbow trout on that scale. But apparently they are not as adaptable to the swift, cold water. As you move upstream, water temperatures are colder and so on, and so the squawfish aren't as much of a competitor the farther up the drainage you go. But the trout, they'll eat just almost anything that moves. And another theory I have about the coloration, especially with the golden trout that live up in the higher elevation, is they often take vegetable materials into their diet along with feeding on aquatic insects and so on. And in these vegetable materials, even though it might be decaying grass or plants or leaves that fall in the creek, have 2 color pigments in them, xanthophyll and what's the other one? I can't remember. Anyway, there are 2 color pigments in plants that produce red and yellow colors. And the trout that are hatched or incubated and hatched in very cold temperatures, like golden trout on the snowmelt, the eggs, the embryos developing in the eggs do not activate enzymes that would break down those color pigments. And so as the fish grows up, it doesn't have the ability to metabolize and use them for energy, so they end up depositing them in the skin, giving them the bright red and yellow colors. The Kern River rainbow trout, as we know it today, could very well become extinct if it is not given some help. the non-native species which could occur in the drainage up above could filter down, hybridize with the Kern River rainbow trout, and thus making it no longer a viable subspecies. So without some control of those non-native species that could hybridize with them, and without some artificial propagation system such as that Kern River hatchery to replenish the stocks that are up there, and also to say swamp out any non-native rainbow trout influence in the lower reaches here. Without those two, the species could become extinct.
It's a Guy Jeans podcast.